Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Buzzcast. We appreciate all the support we've been getting recently. If you aren't already subscribed, make sure to do so below and you'll get notified as soon as we post. Today, Joan is actually on vacation, so you'll be stuck with me doing the interview with everybody. Direct any complaints to her email, joantrice@appraisalbuzz.com. I'll be interviewing Scott Reuter, Chief Appraiser and Director of Valuation, and Vivian Li, Senior Manager in Quantitative Analytics, both with Freddie Mac. We'll be discussing their latest study on racial and ethnic valuation gaps in home purchase appraisals. I know this has been a hot button topic, so let's get right into it. Scott, I think I'll get started with you. Let's talk about this study that Freddie Mac did, kind of what was the reason behind it, what went on with it, the methodology, and all that.
Absolutely, Jim. And firstly, I want to thank you, Joan, and your entire team for reaching out to Freddie Mac. I don't think that there's a more important discussion that we need to be having right now in our industry than this one. So to your question, the research was focused at the appraisal gap, and we examined the raw differences in percentage of properties that received an appraised value lower than the contract price in minority tracts compared to those of white tracts. And we saw gaps. So after observing these gaps, we conducted exploratory research to begin to understand the causes of the valuation gaps for minorities versus white tracts. So as it relates to the research details and the assumptions, the research was based on two assumptions. One, that markets are functioning well. Markets, home sales are functioning well, regardless of the share of minorities living in a neighborhood, one. And two, that the contract price is a reasonable benchmark in purchase transactions. So with that, and from there, we turned to roughly 12 million appraisals in the UCDP for purchase transactions that were submitted to Freddie Mac between January 1st, 2015 and December 31st, 2020. And there were, in cases where there were multiple submissions to the UCDP, this analysis used the first appraisal, and we also excluded non-arm's length transactions, contracts with concession activity exceeding 3%, and appraised values or property types or features that were outside of normal range. For example, property with more than 10 bedrooms or more than 4 stories. There's outliers we excluded and set aside those properties. So as you stated in your introduction, Vivian Li from our research team at Freddie Mac is here today, and I know she can address questions and walk through some of the research methodology.
Thanks, Scott. Let's take a quick break to hear a message from one of our sponsors. Appraisers, what if you could inspect, photograph, and measure a home without leaving yours? With Remote Val, you get to harness the power of new technology without giving up your process or compromising on quality. With our easy-to-use software, you connect to the homeowner's phone and complete your inspection like you normally would. Remote Val lets you capture high-quality meta-tagged photos, take accurate measurements, and communicate directly with the homeowner to get the information you need. Remote Val is fast, easy to use, and completely free for appraisers. To see a demo of Remote Val in action, visit incenteram.com. Thanks, Scott. So Vivian, it's so nice to meet you. Would you walk us through how you define the appraisal gap and then specifically how you selected a sample of appraisers to look at?
Sure, Jim. Nice meeting you. As Scott mentioned earlier, we compare appraisal value versus contract price during purchase transactions. So here, to facilitate our conversation, let's borrow a term, lower appraisal. By lower appraisal, we refer to an appraisal value that falls below the contract price during a purchase transaction. We calculate the percent of properties or applicants receiving lower appraisals. Appraisal gap refers to the percent difference in the share of properties or applicants that receive lower appraisals between minority groups and the white group. A positive gap means that a minority group is more likely to receive a lower appraisal relative to the white group.
Based on this data set, how many appraisers submitted appraisal reports in both white and black tracts out of this group?
We identified 21,058 appraisers who did work in both white tracts and black tracks.
And then what significance did you find as far as these sample powers?
Sure. So after seeing the gaps in the overall data set, many people are very curious to know if these gaps are contributed by just a few appraisers. To find out if that is the case, we did an appraiser level analysis. As we just talked about, there are over 21,000 appraisers who could participate in this study. However, to remove the randomness of the data, we need appraisers who have submitted enough number of appraisals for properties in both black tracks and white tracks for this study. What we did is t-test. So in order to participate in this t-test, we needed to identify the appraisers who have statistical power. So by applying these statistical conditions, we identified 934 appraisers who satisfy this statistical requirement. Then we calculate the appraisal gap using exactly the same method we just talked about. So these gaps were calculated for each of the individual appraisers. By looking at their distribution of t-statistics, we find that at the 5% significance level, 54% of these appraisers have gaps that are statistically significant larger than 0. At the 1% significance level, we find 31% of these appraisers are having significantly larger than 0 gaps.
What could be some of the potential reasons for these 934 appraisers? Is it just racial bias, or is there other factors that could come into place?
So Jim, that's a great question.
I would just add that 2 points on that. And I know Vivian has commented that there's 934 appraisers out of the 21,000 that have statistical significance to look at. So that's different from some confusion that only 900 or so out of the 21,000 were exhibiting the behavior. That's just where they have enough data on. And 2 out of that population, you see split behavior almost 50-50 between how they're handling these assignments in terms of differences. So I'll let you turn it back over to Vivian in a moment, but I think it's important to emphasize or re-emphasize here again, this first study was just looking at the raw differences. So I think questions behind what could be and is there bias and what have you are great questions. But I think right now, just we can stay centered on the fact that we were looking for differences. And I think, and I don't want to speak for Vivian and her team, but we're being informed by the fact that there are differences. And there's a roadmap of things that we're, from a research perspective, looking at and want to continue to look at, armed with a lot of good industry feedback that reinforces a lot of that, but helps inform what that next level of research will look like. So I don't want to speak for Vivian on any of the specific methodology around the research, but I know there's been some appraiser reaction to it in that regard.
All right, so just to be clear, it's not just 900 out of 21,000. It's that 900 had a significant enough sample size to be able to look into that.
That's correct. So, and I'll let Vivian can maybe touch on a little more of the specifics around the methodology, but that was a point of confusion, again, that some thought it was a subset of those appraisers, and really it's 934 appraisers who have done enough work that it's statistically significant enough to look at and begin to examine these differences.
And Vivian, I know there's been some industry discussion around the idea of the opportunity to go further with your research on comp selection and comp distance. Are you able to comment on what might be next?
Sure. So after seeing the gaps, we have already started doing exploratory research to find out how the key drivers contributing to these gaps. We have looked at comp distance, comp reconciliation, comp variance, and purchaser overpayment. We explore these factors one by one. Some differences are identified for each of these individual factors. However, together, these factors are explaining only a modest amount of the gaps we observed. Therefore, we have also moved on to a modeling approach to handle many factors simultaneously. As you have read in our first research note, there are differences in terms of the appraisal gaps, in terms of comp distance, for example. But we want to emphasize that these differences are the raw differences. We have not controlled for other factors forever. But for the next stage of the research, we are controlling for other important factors to check whether the difference is still there, whether the difference is still significant. For example, in terms of comp distance, when we check the raw difference, there is quite a big difference. We know this topic has sparked a lot of interest in the industry, but that is the raw difference. And when you think about the comp distance, there are many potential factors that could help explain why there is a difference. For example, in the urban area, the comp distance may be smaller than in the suburban area. And as we know, the minority groups are more likely to be concentrated in the urban area. So that's one possible factor to explain the comp distance difference. Another factor is the housing turnover rate. Current literature tells us that the housing turnover rate may be higher in the minority area. If that is the case, appraisers may have an easier time to find enough comps without going very far. So these are possible factors to help explain the difference in terms of comp distance. So we are working on these factors, look further into this topic, and hope to share the results with the industry when we are ready.
Thanks, Vivian. We'll get right back to that point, but I have a quick word from our sponsor that I've got to read. Are you stuck in appraisal management technology dark ages, using spreadsheets or antiquated software? You should meet Evo. Evo is the most innovative appraisal management technology on the market, trusted by lenders and AMCs. It's loaded with mind-blowing features like sophisticated decisioning algorithms to select the best appraiser for each order, the ability to configure forms and fields in real time, a user role-based design, and the industry's only compliance guarantee. Find out more at globaldms.com or call 877-866-2747.
I'll add to that, Jim. I as an appraiser, I'm excited for this next level of research. Vivian very well stated where it's pointing. And I think, we've had a real window, hopefully provided the industry a window into how Freddie Mac approaches research, very methodically, not driving to a predetermined end, beginning with raw differences and letting the process inform the next process. And I think, again, as an appraiser, what's the saying, where the rubber hits the road? I think it rubber hits the road in an appraisal with comps. And so I think everything she said is spot on and really makes the next couple iterations of research very exciting around comp distance, the comp variance, the reconciliation, everything that the appraisers have their hands on to really drive value and begin to control for these things that may be telling the story. And I just think it's very important, and I appreciate her bringing that out.
Yeah, and we really appreciate it. And so, Scott, after hearing all this and knowing that the research will continue, what should appraisers be doing about this?
Well, so a few things come to mind. It's a good question. I think now more than ever, appraisers need to be open to ROVs, or reconsiderations of value. No appraiser loves these, but I think, and I certainly didn't when I was in the field, but really be open to and spend time with reconsiderations, particularly thoughtful reconsiderations of value. They have a lot of data submitted, and give them the due time and consideration. 1, 2, I would say, and this isn't directed at all appraisers, but I think an absolute need for fundamentals when developing an appraisal report. Actually complete the analysis and show your work. So that whether that's examining larger data sets, actually examining the market conditions and developing market conditions adjustments. I mean, it's crazy, Jim. We've come off a year, you and Joan and your teams know better than anybody. We've come off a year where we've seen record home price appreciation. And we see at Freddie Mac only roughly 1 in 4 appraisals are we seeing a time adjustment or market conditions adjustment, which is crazy. The average nationwide market appreciation, I think somewhere around 18%, makes the math easy. 12 goes into 18, 1.5, so about 1.5% a month. So if you got a comp 2-3 months old, that comp needs, many appraisers on blogs are saying, well, if I get a comp within a couple of months or I don't make an adjustment, well, the market's screaming, make an adjustment. That's on the average home price nationwide, that's about $15,000. So I was on a lot of blogs and a lot of webinars and a lot of interaction with the industry where appraisers were throwing up their hands saying, the market's just not catching up with this activity. There's ways you can do it, and there's ways they should be doing it. So anyway, they need to be looking at the market. The advancement in tools and techs make this easier than ever. And I would say lastly, maybe just a reminder, and these tied together, just an understanding that with purchases and purchase transactions, the buyer and seller have already kind of agreed, right? They've already kind of mentally agreed, okay, we're settled on that, that's what we sell it for. And the buyer's like, okay, that's what we're going to pay. Now, it's not locked in, and it's the very reason we have appraisals to determine if there's over or underpayment scenarios or if there's market support. But it's just a reminder that I think the bar is higher on those transactions because of that event. And we get busy. Appraisers have been crazy busy. And it's just to say, just remember that if there is something that's going to be returned different or anomalous from that, it's going to cause likely a touch point to revisit. So anyway, I think those are a few things that come to mind that appraisers can do. By and large, I think appraisers are approaching this and attacking it very open-mindedly. But I would say, just particularly coming off a busy year, don't get in those easy traps of trying to gain efficiencies by not really doing the job. So long-windedly, that's what I would recommend. So
Scott, I've got another question coming up for you, but I have a real quick word from our sponsor that I've got to get to. In uncertain times, you need a certain partner. You don't have to sacrifice top-notch coverage for an affordable premium. Intercorp has all the options to ensure to have just the right one to fit your specific needs. They provide the appraisal profession with competitive, best-in-class E&O coverage solutions nationwide. Having served the insurance needs of the industry for more than 25 years, Intercorp understands the risks you face every day. Whether you're an individual appraiser, appraisal firm, residential or commercial, or an AMC, visit intercorpinc.net to get a competitive quote today. Yeah, we had a buzz tune published from Jerry King where the lender's saying, I need 3 comms from in the last day.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, and it is. I mentioned it earlier. My daughter and her fiance bought a home in West Lafayette, Indiana, of all things. She's doing a residency at Purdue for 4 years. And they were bent on buying a home. So that's fine, whatever. They wanted to go out and buy a home. While they drove around in the car, the first day with the realtor, had 4 showings lined up. 2 sold while they were in the car. They were like, well, we're down to 2.
Wow.
Moving that fast. So I've used that as an anecdote to say, yeah, when markets are moving that quick, appraisers really just need to be, sharper than ever to make sure they're really calculating all that rapid fluctuation in market conditions. So.
Well, thank you so much, Scott and Vivian. We really appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate this study from Freddie Mac and looking into it with us. We're excited to see what else you'll have come in with further research into this. And we just really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Appraisers, if you enjoyed this, make sure to let us know. info@appraisalbuzz.com. Like and subscribe, and also comment below. Thanks, and have a great day.